Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you another stabby wrap-up, so horror, thrillers, and not a lot of true crime, but that's okay. Sometimes I include that. Anyway, today I want to talk about some overhyped books, in my opinion, but I also want to balance it out with some recommendations for underhyped gems, because I feel like I was kind of negative in my last video, and once again I'm back with some unpopular opinions, and I might start ranting again. All that being said, let's get started. Let's start on a positive note. I read String Follow by Simon Jacobs, and this is a horror novel that follows a group of teenagers living in a small US town, and you find out that there is some kind of entity or presence that is just preying on the youth and specifically focusing on their weaknesses and just exploiting them for their own purposes. So this is a story that is really hard to describe because it's kind of a crossover between a whole bunch of different genres. And I should say that even though it focuses on teenagers, this is definitely adult horror. So with this book, I need to give huge content warnings for basically everything. If you have triggers, they are probably in this book. So this book has harm to people involving mass gun violence, we have cutting, we have other forms of self-harm, we have abuse and so forth, and just assume that this book is going to be very hard to read. This book, I should also mention, has really low reviews on Goodreads, and I do recognize that this book is not going to be for everyone. I do think that the content warnings is probably a large part of that, because this book definitely deals with a lot of difficult subject matter, and there could be the criticism that is used to kind of exploit or glamorize these topics that are of course very central to teen life. I didn't see the book that way, but I could see other readers being very turned off by the fact that this book in some ways deals with a lot of really offensive topics. It gets very vulgar, very adult. It deals with a lot of just nasty language, nasty situations. I can't get into it without spoiling it, but trust me, again, if you're a sensitive reader, this is one you might want to skip over. However, you might know by this point, if this is not your first time watching my videos, that I tend to like really disturbing, messed up books. I enjoy a book that makes me uncomfortable, and well, this one made me really uncomfortable. I wasn't actually sure how I felt about this book when I finished it. The narrative is very fragmented, which in some ways works to the story's advantage because it's a very unsettling read and you really don't know where it's going. But at the same time, it does, once again, make for a fragmented reading experience. And I do think that this book is not quite perfect. I ended up rereading it and I loved it again, even more the second time, but I still don't think it's perfect. I did not give this book 5 stars. However, I really did like it. Now, this is the kind of book that I would recommend again to those of you that like a book that is very different. I don't think that this is a horror book for beginners. I don't think this is a book for everyone. But if you again follow my channel, you'll notice that I tend to like those really unpopular books. I like books that are just a little bit on the fringes. And again, this is a book that really pushes the envelope. It feels raw and uncomfortable and gritty, and I love all those things about it. So this is one, in my opinion, is a bit of a hidden gem. It's a 2022 release, and you know I've had a really tough relationship with the new releases this year when it comes to horror, so I'm really happy to say that I do recommend this one to the right audience. So if you have a really similar reading taste to me, this is one you might want to pick up. Not for everyone, but if you're again very similar to me in taste, this is one you definitely want to check out if at all possible. Continuing on with the good, I also did a reread of The Troop by Nick Cutter. This is a book I reread with my patron book club. I always have a link down below if you want to join us for a month and also support my channel. And this, if you don't know, follows a young group of Boy Scouts who are going out in the woods with their troop master. They are going out to an isolated place in the Canadian wilderness, and little do they know that there is a voraciously hungry man out on the loose that is coming towards their campground. This is a story that is classic survival horror because, I mean, of course, what could possibly go wrong when you have one adult and a bunch of kids and very little access to the outside world, very little communication? And yeah, I enjoyed this one quite a bit on reread. I forgot how gruesome and disgusting this book is. Tons of body horror, also harm to animals, which I'm really bad for giving as a content warning. I'm just not very sensitive to it. But oh man, rereading this one, yeah, it was bad. So if you haven't checked it out, it is an all-time favorite of mine and definitely one I would recommend. I just think it's a solid read, a very classic horror narrative done very well and easy to fly through, as long as you have a strong stomach. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about picking up this book. Next up, we have have The Void Ascendant by Premee Mohamed, which is the third and final book in the Cosmic Horror trilogy that starts with Beneath the Rising. I'm going to keep this spoiler free for those of you that haven't read this series, but essentially we follow two best friends that have been linked together since childhood. You find them as adults. You find out that the woman of this friendship is a brilliant scientist and has just invented this machine that has ripped a thread through the world and has caused these cosmic creatures to come out. And while I'm not normally a fan of cosmic horror, I really like this first book because it has a lot of really interesting conversations surrounding privilege and race and friendship. And I really like the themes because this book is very central around a particular relationship between these two people. And I just found it to be, again, very close and quiet and thoughtful, and it really struck a chord with me. So I did like this book despite the fact that cosmic horror is not typically my thing. I just don't love the scale of it. And so I went on to read the second book, which I'd previously reviewed on my channel, and then I went on to read the newest book that just came out this year from Rebellion Publishing, which is where I got this copy for review. And essentially, I will say, without spoiling anything, that if you like the really intimate part of the first book, if that is your connection to the story, you won't find that as much here. And I did find that a bit of a struggle because, again, the parts of the story that I first fell in love with were absent in this final one. However, if you like stories that are very epic in scale and you want action and things to just get bigger and bigger with each book, you will find this, because this book is so far from where the first book started, and it's just my fault as a reviewer reader that I really liked those elements at the beginning, and so I did miss them in the later book. But again, if you're a huge fan of cosmic horror, if you like that crazy scale and you just like things to go banana pants crazy, this one might be more up your alley, so keep that all in mind. Next, we have more of a mystery, not even necessarily a thriller, and that is The Maid by Nita, Prose. And this is a really buzzy book right now. Essentially, we follow a maid who is working at her job when she discovers the body of one of the patrons in one of the rooms, and she ends up getting pulled into the murder investigation and possibly seen as a suspect. This is a book that was a little bit out of my wheelhouse for the reason that I knew that it was a cozy mystery, which is not normally my thing. If you know me, again, I tend to prefer my mysteries dark and stabby and really disturbing. But I picked up this one because I'd heard amazing things about the autism representation, and it's just something close to my heart, so I'm always looking to read more. However, I was really disappointed by this one. So I do need to acknowledge that it's not actually on the page. It's never identified that the woman has ASD, but it's heavily implied within the book, and most of the marketers and other reviewers that are out there are calling this autism representation. And I will say, at best, it feels like a okay representation. It feels like the author looked up the symptoms or attributes of ASD and wrote a book with a character that kind of fits all the general stereotypes. That being said, the character just felt really flat. She is written to be very naive, and this started to really grate on me because the whole setup of the book is that it's barely a mystery, because we as the reader can see very clearly who is behind it all, and you get to see the plot points as they're going along, and it's very obvious to everyone except the maid. And I just found it to be very, very frustrating because I feel like the book is set up for us, the presumably neurotypical readers, to be in on the joke, and everyone's kind of smirking and laughing as you see this maid bumbling along and just being oblivious to everything that's happening. So it just felt very disrespectful. I thought it was very poor representation. I don't believe its own voices, and again, perhaps the author does have someone in their life that has these attributes, but it really did not read that way on the page, and I didn't love the reveals at the end. They just were not to my taste. So by the time I finished this went from like a 3.5 star to a 2.5 star, and I just cannot personally recommend this one. If you're looking for autism representation, look elsewhere. They do not claim it to be autism representation, and even if it is, I don't think it's good. I would personally recommend reading something else because this one was not worth my time, and I don't think it's worth yours. Continuing on with more unpopular opinions, I also read The Butterfly Garden by Hutchison, and this is a story following a group of girls that are discovered to be kidnapped and living in this garden. There is a man called the gardener who has tattooed a butterfly onto each of them, and they now live in the garden. As a setup, this one sounded incredibly compelling and creepy, and this book has been recommended to me so many times because of my love of kidnapping stories. However, in terms of execution, I was really let down. First, I want to say that I found the writing or the prose to be very, very weak, which I did find to be distracting and really took me out of the story. And I also did not like the narrative structure because it's told after the fact with these police officers or FBI interviewing this young woman, and I just found it to be really annoying. The cops were basically shown to be just very ignorant and just kind of bumbling fools, and then you have flashbacks to the garden, which is easily the most interesting part, but then you also get flashbacks to the growing up and kind of the woman's life before going into the garden, and I just found the story not that interesting, not that creepy, and again, really the prose just bogged down the book for me because I found them to be so frustrating. So not one I personally recommend. I love kidnapping stories. I will read all of them, but this is one I would personally say to skip unless you love it. And again, I know I've gotten recommendations to read this book for many years, so obviously a lot of you like it, so no disrespect to you, it's just really not for me. Then I read The Monsters We Make by Callie White, and this is a mystery story that's told over a few perspectives. Essentially, you find out that a young mail courier or newspaper boy has gone missing, and you find out that this has happened before in this town, so it appears to be possibly a serial killer or some kind of repeat offender. So we follow a few different perspectives, one being the police officer who investigated the last case that is now involved in this one, and we also follow the perspective of a young teenager who is wanting to go to university to be a journalist, so she's using this case as a chance to kind of get some practice and experience. This book in some ways read a little bit young because of that teenage perspective, but I do believe it's classified as adult thriller because I really don't read very many, if any, young adult thrillers at this point. I will say that this story hit on a lot of the classic tropes that I do enjoy, kind of a child going missing and the investigation and some of those things that I do like to see in like small town life and these kind of mystery stories. However, in terms of the actual story, I don't know how memorable it's going to be. I read this one, honestly, I finished it yesterday or the day before as I'm filming this, and it's already starting to fade from my mind, which is not a good sign. I will say if you're trying to find a new audiobook to read, this is available through Hoopla, which is a really common library app. But if you're looking for a thriller that is going to stick with you for years and years, you might want to find something else. This was fun, but honestly a little forgettable. And lastly, I want to talk about The Science of Women in Horror, which is a book I received from the publicist for review. I recently talked about this one at quite some length in my book haul, so I'm going to try to keep this brief. But essentially, this is a pop culture book that is focused around horror in movies and TV shows, centering around a focus on women. But this book definitely has wide appeal to people of all genders because really it's just celebrating horror. And I am someone who is underwatched in a lot of the classic horror films, so I was really pleased how much of this book I was able to read. Full disclosure, I have not read this book cover to cover, which is a very unusual thing for me. I will always let you know when this happens, and that's simply because as a piece of nonfiction, I didn't want to spoil movies that I still want to watch. However, I was actually able to read a lot of this book. So again, it has a lot of ones like The Babadook, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, popular ones that I haven't seen, but like Sleepaway Camp. I know I've seen Gerald's Game, Us. You have things like Beetlejuice, Friday the 13th, which I still need to watch, and of course Stranger Things and Buffy, which yes, I will get to a watch of that, I heard you all, as well as things like Ghostbusters, X-Files, Ginger Snaps, which is very good and Canadian. So I was really pleased how much of this book I was able to consume despite not having watched every single horror movie, because again, I feel like I'm really missing out. If I had a criticism, it's just that the title is perhaps a bit misleading, that there really is no science in this book. Instead, it's just really a pop culture candy read where you are just getting to learn little different facts and tidbits about these different movies and shows, again focused around the female characters, but not in a way that's really heavy-handed. And yeah, if you can't tell, I enjoyed this one. It was a lot of fun and a little bit different than the kinds of fiction that I normally pick up. Every once in a while I do like to actually learn something by picking up something, say, nonfiction. Anyway, definitely recommend it if you are a horror movie junkie. This is one you might want to check out for yourself. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out and which ones are you planning on skipping? I would also love for you to recommend me a hidden gem when it comes to horror thrillers that you don't think I've read yet, because I'm always looking for more books to read. I read a ton, and so I'm constantly burning through my TBR. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror thrillers, true crime, fantasy, and science fiction. If you are already subscribed, thank you so much. You can help me out with giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it around online, dropping a comment, even if just a little emoji like a hidden gem. So if you can find a little gem or jewel icon, that would be perfect. Or a shoe. I was really happy last time when a bunch of people dropped some shoe emojis, so let's keep that going. Jewels or shoes, go for it. Otherwise, if you're still around, thank you so much. If you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Otherwise, I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.